I'm Aditya, and I'm a software engineer in the MAPS team, and I'm here to introduce Professor Dacher Keltner of the University of California at Berkeley, where he's a professor of psychology and director of their Greater Good Science Center. Professor Keltner is with us today to present work he's published in his recent book, Born to be Good: The Science of a Meaningful Life. His work is inspiring, timely, and relevant, particularly given our own motto, Don't Be Evil. His work has garnered numerous accolades. Wired magazine has described podcasts from his course Emotions as one of the 5 best educational downloads online. Barnes & Noble Book Review has written that his book is deeply fascinating for, quote, anyone interested in, well, life. So, assuming you're interested in, well, life, please welcome Professor Dacher Keltner.
Thank you, Aditya. Well, it's a terrific honor to be here and to talk to you about this crazy science that we do up at Berkeley and that's spreading throughout different departments throughout the country. I've had a couple of great Google experiences just in the last 12 hours or so. Last night I used your map system to plan out a vacation into the high Sierras, and that was terrific, really spectacular. And then this morning my daughter, preparing for a 6th grade math test, was asking me about adjacent angles and complementary angles and supplementary angles. I was like, oh. So I Googled it and got quick answers. So it's good work. As Aditya talked about, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the themes that I developed in this book that I just published. And it really is at the heart of the center that I direct and the science that we do up at Berkeley. It is, can you guys hear me if I step away? Okay, great. Today what I'd like to do is to talk about my favorite emotion, and a fascinating emotion from an evolutionary and neuroscience perspective, which is compassion or sympathy. In a terrific book, the historian Jonathan Glover, and for those of you who are interested in a history of sympathy and compassion, writes about this fascinating thing that happens in combat, which he calls sympathy breakthroughs, which is in the heat of combat, people will face their adversaries, be ready to kill, they've been trained to kill, and then they become overwhelmed with this emotional response that he calls a sympathy breakthrough to their adversaries. George Orwell, the great essayist, was fighting the fascists in Spain and had this terrific experience where a fascist came running at him. He was a little bit disorganized and had his shirt off, and Orwell was about to pull the trigger and just couldn't do it because he became overwhelmed with this emotion. There are actually fascinating studies, historical studies from the Second World War showing that most of the time people actually do not shoot their bullets at enemies, and that led to a major revision that you might have heard about in military strategy about training combatants how to shoot at the enemies. The claim that Glover makes is that we're wired up to feel this connection even to adversaries in the heat of combat. If you go to the science that I work in, which is really psychological science or evolutionary science, you see that that view that we're capable of these sympathy breakthroughs is not widespread. And in fact, one of the points that I counter in the book that I think Aditya was referring to with respect to your mission is the counterpoint to the thesis that we're wired for a competitive and nasty and brutish life. Well, in our science, there's this widespread assumption that the bad in human nature is stronger than the good. And I actually want to take that head on with a lot of data that you'll hear about today. But this is a compelling idea. It has many manifestations. So for example, when people write about basic attachments between caregiver and offspring, the supposition in our science is that it's motivated by anxiety, sort of a Freudian anxiety. You guys have probably been exposed to debates about altruistic behavior, why we give to kin, non-kin, strangers, often at a great expense to the self. The contemporary science says it really is about selfish motives or some sort of Freudian defense mechanism where we're worried that we're not good people and we give, and that is the primary motive. And we'll make a different case today. One of my favorite ideas in this bad is stronger than the good thesis is a very interesting idea that Paul Rozin at the University of Pennsylvania has detailed, which is about contamination. And Rozin observes, isn't it fascinating how powerful bad things are in terms of contaminating, right? So Rozin, who studies food, and I apologize to those of you who are eating, has this observation that if you're about to eat a delicious meal, right, and a cockroach walks close to your plate, the essence of that cockroach, its badness, contaminates your delicious meal and you can't eat. Now think about the opposite, right? You're about to eat a pile of cockroaches, you put a truffle next to it, the goodness of the truffle doesn't spread over and change the essence of the cockroaches. And he kind of talks about, wow, maybe that's just the state of nature's bad trumps good. And I'm going to show you a lot of data that suggests otherwise. Now, this idea about the basic state of human nature being corrupt and competitive and brutish has deep places in Western thought, as I review in my book, and very high-profile champions or advocates. I'll give you a couple of random quotes that I got to sort of survey as I wrote this book. Sigmund Freud, the very emphasis on the commandment, thou shalt not kill, makes it certain that we are descended from an endlessly long chain of generations of murderers. Ayn Rand, the most influential philosopher outside of probably Plato and Aristotle ever, and maybe Kant and Descartes. Anybody know who Ayn Rand's favorite disciple was? Alan Greenspan, hung around her circle for quite some time. Ayn Rand, in a well-known essay in Playboy magazine, kid you not, if any civilization, wish I could publish in Playboy magazine, I'd have a bigger audience, but if any civilization is to survive, it is the morality of altruism that men have to reject. In other places, she said that an act of altruism or acting on the behalf of other people is an act of treason. This is the one that really bothers me in the science that I work in, which is George Williams, the natural world. He's a well-known evolutionary thinker, really fundamental in getting us to think about what it means to call something an adaptation, right? And Williams said the natural world is grossly immoral. Natural selection can honestly be described as a process for maximizing short-sighted self-interest. And regrettably, that turns out to be wrong-headed, as we'll see with the science that unfolds. Now, very interestingly, Charles Darwin had a much different view of human nature that is often lost sight of. We associate Charles Darwin with the thesis that it is survival of the fittest. That wasn't Darwin's, as you guys probably know, phrase. That was Herbert Spencer, who popularized Darwin. Darwin actually made the case that sympathy is our strongest instinct, and I think for very sensible reasons that we'll move through today. That compassion, caring, bringing out the good in others is our strongest feature of our design, which we'll talk about. And Darwin, in my own science, Frank Soloway and I have started to write about Darwin's amazing conceptions of all the different positive emotions that we should be studying as scientists. This is a distillation of his specific observations about emotion. Darwin's idea was that the emotions that we observe today, which I'll show you some photos of, are really the final vestiges or products of these mammalian processes of building up social relationships that have evolved for hundreds of millions of years. And what we see today are really the tips of an evolutionary iceberg. And if there's one thing you get out of this talk is you should go read Darwin, his expression book, his Descent of Man. The guy had an eye to human nature, unlike any. His expression book is the best book on emotion to this day. And here's some observations that tell us about the evolutionary origins of emotion. In a state of devotion, we get into a humbling kneeling posture he was observing back in his Victorian England. We get very small. We feel a state of reverence for things that are greater than the self. My favorite, and this will remind you of your colleagues perhaps, he observed in a state of cheerfulness when you're feeling really upbeat and happy. you just might get caught with your nostrils raised and then smacking your lips and rubbing your belly when you're feeling really good about this, which is making the point that out of consumption and the opioid system that's involved in eating came this emotion of cheerfulness. Great observations about human emotions. Okay, so what I want to tell you today is a story, an evolutionary story about compassion. We will have little detours to emotions perhaps of interest to you, like love and desire and the like. And it really flows out of this Darwinian analysis that evolutionary psychologists have been working on, where we try to understand the deep origins of an emotion, a genetically encoded emotion, in the problems that it solved in our evolutionary history as this very particular social, interesting primate that we are. Okay? So what do we know? We know we're pair bonders, which is interesting, which I'll talk about. We have amazing capacities for reconciliation. We have very interesting hierarchies compared to other primates that are much more negotiated. I write a lot about that or study that in my work on power and hierarchies. And then important for today's lesson, which is we're caretakers. We are a profoundly caretaking species. And this will really set the stage for our understanding of emotion. These are our close primate relatives. They are the bonobo on the left, and then the little chimpanzee infant on the right. They're doing things that are pretty unusual for human offspring. What strikes you about them? What seems different? Feeding themselves. They're able to sit upright, right? If we position a little human baby like that, it would fall backwards and damage its brain with catastrophic effect. And they're very self-sufficient, right? The human offspring, because we developed these big brains and these giant heads, and because our pelvis is narrowed as we started to walk upright, our offspring are born more vulnerable and more premature than any mammal on the face of the earth. The estimates are that they take from 7 to 46 years to reach the age of independence. Depending on the state of the economy, we have to adjust that upward figure a little bit. But that, we lost sight of this basic, raw evolutionary fact about the human species. And what people are starting to say is that the dependence of our offspring rearranged our social structures, gave rise to caretaking as a basic dimension to social structures, and what I'll show to you today is it rearranged our nervous systems and our emotion profile. So, in my lab, we study all kinds of positive emotions. I'm happy to talk to you about other positive emotions than compassion today, if in our Q&A and our discussion later on. But today I want to sort of give you this distilled science on compassion. We think all of these emotions have very important places in our evolutionary story. Okay. So compassion is just a concern to enhance the welfare of others who are in need. It's different from other concepts like empathy, understanding another person's mind, a feeling of love of humanity or pity or the like. You guys know that. It's a concern for the welfare of others. And to be honest, compassion hasn't fared well in Western thought. There have been very vocal critics of this all-important emotion. Like Immanuel Kant was not a big fan of compassion. He felt, as I state here in point 3, it's just way too subjective and it moves around unpredictably to be an ethical principle, which is sort of one of the many critiques levied against compassion. But Darwin thought it was our primary instinct. And Karen Armstrong, how many of you guys have read Karen Armstrong? Great religious historian, writes about the historical development of different spiritual traditions, said, at the heart of spiritual traditions, 2,500 years ago, cultural traditions, is compassion, is building up this emotion that enables you to take care of others in cooperative relationships. Okay, so any deep historical questions or cultural observations about emotion? The bad is stronger than the good. Compassion. Yeah?
Could you back up a slide?
Sure.
So there seems to be a strong assumption of group selection in this quote.
Yeah.
Are you going to address that in your talk?
Yeah, what a insightful question. Group selection is the idea that we have properties that have been shaped by evolution because they gave certain groups, right, Cro-Magnons, advantages in fending or competing against other groups, Neanderthals. It's a very controversial thesis. As you very astutely observed, Darwin believed in it, or implicitly, fell out of favor. And then if you really want to track it, David Sloan Wilson and Elliot Sober are writing about how certain properties of the human psyche, like our interest in beauty, may be shaped by group selection, that it helps groups do really well. I'm agnostic about it. I think it is useful, but it's going to be very hard to get the data that show that you need that idea to explain some kind of part of human nature. But excellent observation. Yeah. You.
Two questions. First one is, when you said that humans give birth to the most underdeveloped animals, what about marsupials? Like, they have way less developed babies.
Yeah, but even the comparisons with them, like if you just look at the length at which it takes to reach independence and mature, it's just a much slower trajectory. They are born more premature, you're right, but it just takes them a shorter period of their lifespan to reach the age of viability.
And the other question was, when you talked about the bad contaminating the good, but not the good curing the bad.
Yeah.
Isn't that like completely true and a completely natural extension of like biological contamination, of like rot and disease and all of that, and just something that would be inherent in people?
So push it one step further. So I'm not quite following.
So when you said like the cockroach runs past your delicious meal and suddenly the meal is less appetizing, but you put a truffle next to the cockroaches and the cockroaches don't
Right.
look good.
Right.
Isn't that a completely natural extension of like
Viruses and the like, right?
Like all that, like doesn't that in a sense prove that we're psychologically wired as an origin of that to believe that bad things?
Yeah, I think that is the psychological origin of that belief, is that it's a fear of toxic contamination, but it doesn't, we've overextended that idea to think that that is just the state of nature in the human being, is that all of our bad tendencies are more robust. And there are a lot of new data that I'll survey that suggests that's wrong-headed. So, yeah?
Yet if you put a celebrity next to a cigarette, the cigarette starts to look good.
It does. That's right. And that's my mission at the Greater Good Science Center, is to do that work. All right. Excellent questions. Wow. About 10 years ago, I started to take Darwin's thesis seriously and to get interested in this emotion of compassion that the great thinkers from Aristotle to Confucius to the Buddha on down have been interested in since time immemorial. But for some reason, scientists, because of this bad is stronger than good bias, forgot to look at this all-important emotion of compassion. And so from an evolutionary perspective, and this is really relevant to the work you guys are doing, and I'm sure you have very sophisticated thinking, I'd love to hear about this. Here's the question that was implicit in some of your comments, which is, all right, how in the world, from an evolutionary perspective, from a game theoretic perspective, or when you start to model the spread of genetic tendencies in populations, how could a compassionate strategy where you're really invested in the welfare of others at the expense of the self, how could that take hold in social groups and then become genetically encoded into the human organism? And evolutionists like David, I'm glad you mentioned group selection. Elliot Sober is terrific on this. Robert Axelrod, The Evolution of Cooperation, you may have read, and others say, and Robert Frank, you really need to honor 3 or 4 principles for pro-social strategies to start to prevail in the competition of other strategies in our evolutionary past. 1, you got to find the good, you got to reliably identify what is truthful and good, right, to interact with that kind of individual. 2, maybe compassion is really contagious, and if it's contagious, it will reset our social orientation to allow for more cooperative behavior. It just switches us from a self-interested mindset to a more cooperative mindset. 3, maybe it'll change how we do the calculus of giving and being altruistic to make it easy and to reduce the constraints of giving. And then 4, maybe we can use solid evolutionary argument to say, actually, people who are pro-social or compassionate fare better in the classic tasks of evolution. And all I'll say on this one is, it's so fascinating. The number one, what do you think in a survey of 37 nations and 10,000 people, what's the number one attribute, the deepest human universal people look for in a mate? What would you guess? This is like a Rorschach test. You've got to be careful when you answer.
That they say or that they believe?
Reasonable. Symmetric features.
Goodness.
There you go. Number 1. Beauty, big lot of drama about sex differences in beauty. Men like it more than women. It's about a 2 on a 3-point scale. Kindness is 2.87. It just trumps around the world, and for very solid evolutionary reasons.
Self-reported.
Yeah, it is.
Right, because everyone says they don't value you know.
But you're advocating we have to come clean and
Yeah, I'm saying there's
Yeah.
probably a self-reporting bias.
I'm totally with you. You're speaking my language. That's why I hope to. So these are some principles, but I'll show you some new data we have that say it pays to be good. Okay, so I'm going to go on a Darwinian voyage with you in search of this most pro-social of the swath of human nature we'll call compassion. And I'll start, I did a lot of work with Paul Ekman, who's kind of the progenitor of Lie to Me, this show, and you know, did all this facial expression work. So as a young scientist, I got really excited because it turns out when people are feeling compassion, right, I thought, well, let's find that reliably identifiable signal. When people feel compassion, that is the muscle movement in the face that they do, which is a little oblique eyebrow. It's 2 muscles that pull your eyebrows up and in. I took this to different parts of the world to demonstrate. That was pretty good. I took it to different parts of the world, like India, Japan, the Philippines, to see if it's a universal Darwinian signal of compassion. My participants looked at that and they said, compassion? Gee, she looks like she's confused. She's doing a Sudoku puzzle. She's a little constipated. That's not compassion, and I failed. So it is not in the face. The voice, we put so much emphasis on the face. The voice is our richest modality, our most primate-specific modality of emotion communication for interesting evolutionary reasons. With little half-second sounds, we can communicate about 20 emotions. And we've done this work in my lab. You guys ready? I'm going to give you a test. This is the latest sound that my preteen, soon-to-be pubescent daughter gives to me on almost any time I open my mouth or put on a piece of clothing. See if you guys know what this means. Right? I'm like, hey, what's wrong with Keens? They're kind of cool. They're comfortable. I got bad knees, you know. But we have this amazing vocal repertoire of emotion sounds. And indeed, it's actually one of the 5 primate signals. Little primates actually, when babies approach, have this thing they call coos or gurns, right? It kind of sounds like our sigh. And we've done research, soon to be published, that if I ask you, this would be interesting for your guys' technologies, which is, if I ask you just to use a sound to communicate an emotion, and then I present those sounds to people in different parts of the world, what you can see is that people are pretty good at picking up compassion with sounds. It sounds like a sigh, oh, right? And we have amazing bandwidth in communicating things like amusement and awe. Now, you may be surprised to discover, and I'm a little disheartened by this, when people try to communicate love, it was a disaster, and yet again, humans have this problem, but that's not part of today's talk. So we're pretty good at that. But the real language of compassion is touch. You know, there is a stunning new science of touch that I try to synthesize with these crazy slides here, but I'll work through really quickly. A simple touch on your forearm. If I touched Aditya's forearm, it would activate a part of the brain that's involved in processing of rewards called the orbitofrontal cortex. It's a basic reward. It releases oxytocin, which we'll talk about. Touch, if you get the right kind of touch in a classroom, pat on the back, students are twice as likely to speak out. in class. If librarians touch the hand of a student checking out a book, the student is twice as likely to return to the library and not be able to explain why they like the library, right? I don't know, it feels kind of good in here. There is amazing new science of touch showing little rat pups that are touched a lot, if they're put into a mother's environment, right, reared by a rat mother called a dam that touches a lot and grooms a lot, that rat pup a year later has fewer interconnections in the stress-related part of the brain and a stronger immune system. It is stunning how powerful touch is. So powerful is touch. You guys know primates spend, the more sophisticated the primate, the more time they spend touching to build up trading relationships. And then that little guy, anybody know what that little primate is on the right? No?
Lemur?
No? I've asked 10,000 people that, and there's only one person known, a little 8-year-old boy who is a genius at primates. He's like, that's a slow loris. And I was like, wow, come work in my lab. Well, what's amazing about the slow loris is it evolved one finger only that it uses to groom. That's how powerful touch is in primate evolution. And so here's what we did to capture this in this crazy study you may have heard about. We had people come to the lab, and we wanted to see if they could communicate these pro-social emotions through touch as sort of a signal of compassion and a way to spread goodness to others. What we did, it's kind of a crazy study, we built this big barrier. We built a hole in the barrier. One person came in, stuck their arm through the hole and waited. Then we brought another participant to the lab, and we gave them a list of emotions, and we said, touch that forearm, and that person has to guess what just happened, right? To try to communicate gratitude or love or compassion, anger, fear, and so on. So, there you are. You get touched in the forearm. You're going, okay, I think that was gratitude. Those are remarkable identification rates in that graph. Chance guessing, we had 12 emotions in this study, was about 8.5%. They're getting compassion at 60%. In high touch cultures, my student went to Spain. The US is a low touch culture. One graphic on that just for you guys to take home and think about. When friends talk to each other, one researcher found, English friends touched each other 0 times. American friends twice. Puerto Rican friends in the same unit of time 180 times. I think most of our healthcare problems, I've written op-eds on this that have all been rejected. Berkeley professor thinks, put aside all this public option stuff, just go out and touch each other, but oh well. But, it's impoverished. My student took it to Spain. They were much better at it. They had a more sophisticated language of this. We've gotten into a whole language of touch. One finding that's under review, but I'll tell you about it. We coded the touch of NBA teams, and basketball players have a great language of touch that's really friendly. And my favorite unit of that touch is the flying shoulder bump, and then the head slap, and that's when they're really getting along and cooperating. They slap each other in the head. But what you see here is the ability to communicate compassion through touch, and this is so vital for the male-female dynamic. We had 2 gender differences that you'll have to meditate on, and we had all gender combinations of touching and being touched. When women try to communicate anger to a man, he had no idea what she was doing, and he got 0 right. I was like, no, you got to analyze that data again. I don't believe it. And then when the man tried to communicate compassion to a woman, she got 0 right. She had no idea what he was up to. And she would say things like, I don't think that was a human hand. I think that was a slug that dropped onto my arm. And, and I'm like, ah. And a therapist, he almost was in tears. He's like, this is the entire dynamic where men are like, I truly care for you, pinch, or whatever they're doing. So, did you have a question or comment? Yeah.
What about the effects of negative touch versus
Yeah.
positive touch?
Yeah.
Powerful.
Well, you know, I've given you the pro-social side, and there hasn't been as much systematic study on, you know, what firm pinches do, but obviously, you know, our bet is that just as pro-social touch is processed with certain sensory receptors in your skin, which goes to your cortex and says, this is trusting, clearly, no one's done this study, and it'd be a great study, which is really aggressive touch probably activates amygdala and then the cortisol system, but no one's done that, and that'd be very important data to have. So, all right, so let me just round out our 2 points. Compassion has a signal in the Darwinian sense through touch, voice. It is spread through this amazing language of touch that predates the spoken language and semantics, and I think is the language of moral connection and trust. And then there are a lot of neat new data on how powerful, you guys, I'm sure, are working on this and probably have a lot of data. It would be interesting for someone like me to look at, but how fast goodness spreads and prosociality spreads through basic, their findings where newborns will cry when they hear another baby cry, but not their own distress call. Have you guys heard about Christakis at Harvard, his social network stuff? Unbelievable data. He has a new book out called Connected. If I am feeling kind, first of all, he finds positive emotion. He studies the spread of everything in a community in Massachusetts. Obesity spreads, cigarette smoking spreads, depression is contagious, and what he has recently found is happiness and kindness spreads more powerfully through social networks than negative stuff, which is interesting with respect to some of the comments you had earlier. One of the great findings is, just recent, and I'll build on it later, if I'm feeling kind and considerate, and I interact with Aditya, he gets a boost in that feeling. He goes to another part of his physical space, has an interaction. That person is more pro-social, and I haven't even interacted with them, right? And you guys know this well. This is your business. But now we're getting great data on the potency of how that spreads. Okay, so that's the MBA touching study. I have just a couple of, we're right on track. We'll have good 5-10 minutes for open-ended discussion, and if you have other questions as we move through this. So I hope what I've convinced you of, and we've moved quickly, is there is this signal in a new paper we have coming out. We show how primates, hunter-gatherers, all the right kind of evolutionary approaches show that in the primate Darwinian language of emotion, we have this compassionate behavior that Darwin wrote about that science is starting to document. And compassion is very powerfully contagious. So the third barrier to getting compassion encoded as a stable strategy in the human repertoire is to, economists and philosophers and early game theoreticians wrote a lot about this, which is, it's clear there are a lot of boundary conditions, there are a lot of constraints upon acting altruistically, right? You can be exploited, you can give resources and lose resources, which becomes consequential in impoverished environments or resource-deprived environments. The Machiavellians of the world, the guys who are out to screw other people, can find the good people and say, yeah, I'll give you back later on, and take advantage of you, right? There are a lot of constraints to acting altruistically. And so the way that the game theoreticians have reasoned about this is that you have to change the calculus, the mental calculations of being good, and find rewards in it, or change the sense of the person you're giving to. And there are stunning new data coming out of the neuroscience world, finding that, for example, if I cooperate with you and you're a stranger, it activates a part of the brain, you probably heard about the ventral striatum, which is in the middle of the brain, loaded up with dopamine receptors, right? My act of cooperation downstream triggers the physiology of reward. There's a more recent study by Harbaugh and colleagues showing that if I sacrifice for you, it has the same neurological downstream consequences where I give to you, I know self-interest has been risked, but the nucleus accumbens and ventral striatum light up, and the dopamine is rewarding that altruistic behavior. That's pretty amazing that it's inherently rewarding to give, which will change it, the cost of giving. But I've been really interested in this one, that Peter Singer, the ethicist, wrote about, which is another way that we make kindness and goodness and cooperation easier is by changing our sense of the other people in our environment. That we assume if we're the same, it's easier to give to similar people. Peter Singer wrote about this amazing capacity for humans to expand our sense of who we care about, our circle of care. Steve Pinker has written about how that is a major trajectory in human history, is expanding who we consider to have rights and worthy of respect. So we've done studies where we activate compassion in people. We're doing neuroscientific studies of this. We show images of harm and suffering. And what you find when you feel that is the blue bar is compassion. And we ask them, how similar are you to 20 different groups, right? All kinds of different groups. Farmers, Republicans, Democrats, terrorists, lawyers, medical practitioners, God forbid, Stanford undergrads. These are Berkeley undergrads. Like, oh, am I similar to that person? But what you find, they object to that, right? Especially since we place just below Stanford in football. What's great is compassion activates this sense of similarity to people who are vulnerable. Pride does the opposite. It makes you feel like, oh, I have a lot in common with the doctors over there, but less so with the homeless. Compassion has the opposite effect. What compassion also does, I'm totally flipped out about this part of our nervous system, which will sort of set the stage for our final part of our day. How many of you have heard of the vagus nerve? Okay, that's amazing. How in the world did you find out about it?
Because I think I fainted a few times from history as a kid. It's what the vasovagal something
Right.
or other. Yeah.
It kind of slows down,
Yeah.
drops your blood pressure. Like,
Right.
I read an article implicating it in hiccups.
this is exactly why I studied it with respect to compassion, right?
Apparently, stimulating the vagus nerve, providing a strong stimulus, will stop hiccups.
Yeah. I didn't know that. But that's not why I'm showing you this picture. So the vagus nerve is this fascinating part of our nervous system. It's involved in fainting. I didn't know it was involved in hiccups. And there's an argument that actually evolution has built up this bundle of nerves over mammalian evolution because it helps us take care of others and find beauty in the goodness of others, if you want to get lofty and poetic. But let's just deal with some basic biological facts. The vagus nerve starts at the top of your spinal cord, near the pons, a part of your brain stem that controls breathing and basic biological function. It comes out of your top of your spinal cord, and it influences muscles involved in vocalization, muscles involved in postural movements like head nods and postural orientation. And then it winds its way down to your heart and your lungs, and it coordinates those two biological rhythms. The vagus nerve helps your heart rate vary as your respiration varies, right? And that's actually how we measure it. I don't know if you did this work, Aditya, in James's lab over at Stanford, but you can measure activation in the vagus nerve by looking at how your heart rate changes in its variation with your respiration pattern. It's a classic synchrony of the two rhythms. Steve Porges has made the case that the vagus nerve is unique to mammals. It helps you orient to others and slows your heart rate down. We now are finding that when the vagus nerve fires, it stimulates oxytocin receptor networks. Maybe this is part of the caretaking system that Darwin started to speculate very early on. When I show people slides like I just showed you of suffering, you get a vagus nerve response, which is interesting. And there's that finding. Increased change in RSA, or respiratory sinus arrhythmia, which is vagus nerve, correlates with my feeling of compassion and feeling I'm connected to diverse other groups. And it is part, as we'll see later, of this basic prosociality. Now, the vagus nerve, when we start to map this good system that Google should be turning on in more of our human citizens, the vagus nerve activates this little chemical called oxytocin. I bet a lot of you have heard about oxytocin. It used to be a mystery about 15 years ago. It's involved in breastfeeding, uterine contractions, milk letdown. When you eat chocolate, you get a little burst of oxytocin. When the baby comes out of that narrow birth canal and its head is shaped like a trapezoid and it looks like it's come out of a boxing match, and the mom looks at it and goes, "You're the most beautiful thing in the world." That's oxytocin surging through her bloodstream, you know. And when the dad's like, "God, I don't know if that one's mine. It has dark hair." That's because he has 1/7 the rate of oxytocin as women, I regret to tell you. If you give oxytocin to, have you guys heard about this work? There are trust games, which will figure prominently at the end of my talk in 4 minutes or 5 minutes. You have two strangers playing this economic game called the trust game. One of them gets money, $10. They give some lump sum to the other one. That value of the gift triples, and the person gives back. German scientists who get to study oxytocin in the lab, we can't here in the United States.
Why not?
I don't know. That's the FDA. But if you give oxytocin to the giver in the game, as you see on the left bar, 50% of them give away all their money. It's unprecedented. That's a baseline control on the right. They're like, they whiff this oxytocin, they go, "You're beautiful, man, here you go," you know, and they give it away. So Google should be doing some oxytocin work. So in my lab, we got interested in oxytocin in its relationship to a close cousin of compassion, which is devoted love, which actually we can pull apart from compassion, which is a whole other inquiry. You know, this is one of my favorite painters, Jan Steen, who is a contemporary of Vermeer. Didn't quite get the fame of Vermeer. He's a little bit rougher, but I actually think more, you know, coming out of 17th century Holland. That middle, it's so interesting how few paintings there are in Western art of positive emotion. Most of it is, you know, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But this gets it all. If I saw this before I did all my 15 years of science, I'd stop because he got it all. This has the whole spectrum of positive emotion. The lustful kiss right up there, that guy on the far left who's trying to kiss the young maiden, the beautiful laugh, the lute player looking reverentially up into the ether as he plays music. And then Jan Steen, the painter, always paints himself. He's on the left-hand side there. He's wearing that funny-looking hat. He's kind of drunk, and he's laughing because he had a tragic life. And then his second wife right there is displaying the beautiful displays of love that I'm going to show you correlate with oxytocin relief that primates do when they're cooperating, which is you tilt your head, probably the vagus nerve, you do open-handed gestures, nice smile, you show that luscious area of vulnerability, the neck, which evokes this caretaking response in others from an evolutionary perspective. Now, I asked 9-year-olds in a summer camp that I teach at, I teach them Charles Darwin, what does love look like? Just to start my scientific inquiry on this, how it was, and here's what we get. That guy on the right-hand side, first grader, second grader, Austin, he kind of is a dramatic young fellow, and he kind of gets it right. He's the first guy that ever kissed my daughter. I'm in first grade math, I was helping out in math. After he completed his math exercise, right in front of me, he went right up to her and gave her a smooch on the cheek. He goes, "I'm done." I was like, what's going on here, right? As you can see, women have a massive advantage in the pro-social realm. Her display is perfect. It's got the head tilt, the little open-handed gestures. She's about to give she got a little nervous pinch there. That's a beautiful smile. I have to worry about that dude right there. Look at that. I literally said, what does love look like? Click. Anyway. I'm like, Ashton, you're 9 years old, man. You don't have any testosterone in your body. Stop that. So there he is. Looking at that. So my former student, John Gonzaga, who now runs research at eHarmony, he turned down the Ivy League professorships to do that, but can't win them all. We got interested in, is there a cue of love that correlates with oxytocin release, this great progenitor of cooperation? And we compared it to sexual desire. a good comparison in the Darwinian sense. Primates, including humans, do a lot of things just prior to copulation. Try to think back till you're late. Anyway, I won't test on that. They pucker their lips, they lick their lips, they bite their lips. After I did this research, I discovered I have a senior female colleague. Whenever she talks to me, she pathologically licks her lips. I'm like, back off, right? Primates do a lot of open-handed gestures, head tilts, and smile displays when they want to groom and affiliate and be trusting. And so I don't have time. We validated our love cues. Those nice open-handed gestures and head tilts correlate with feelings of love. But this is the oxytocin story, which is we had women recalling an experience of connection with another person. They showed a lot of these Darwinian cues of nice head tilts and open-handed gestures versus the sexualized lip licks and lip puckers. We drew blood at UC San Francisco. We assayed oxytocin in the bloodstream, which you get a clear measure of 15 minutes after this measurement. And what you find is the love cues mapped to oxytocin. Pretty cool. So finally, let me just tell you, does it pay to be good? And I have another really neat finding to convey to you, just hot off the presses. I think this research starts to show that compassion it's as robust a part of the nervous system as the fight or flight parts that you guys all know about, cortisol, amygdala, and the like, the HPA axis that Robert Sapolsky at Stanford in his genius work has captured. I think we're starting to paint a picture of this pro-social nervous system. But does it pay to be good? And needless to say, what I can tell you is if you are pro-social, you fare better in the mating market. That's pretty good solid evidence for prosociality as an evolutionary strategy. If you are pro-social, you have richer friendship networks. Young kids who are pro-social have better friendship networks, which is good evidence for an evolutionary claim that this evolved. If you are pro-social, your offspring fare better on almost every health indicator. And when the data are done, we'll find that the high oxytocin parents have kids who are just more robust physically and in an evolutionary framework would be less likely to die. A third of our offspring died in earlier evolutionary times, and that prosociality clearly was a protective device. That is just the basic mechanics of evolution. But does it pay to be good? So here's what we did. And we haven't published this, so we're still working on it. But one way to ask the question is what game theoreticians did in all the prisoner's dilemma game work that you've probably heard about, where you just get a person, you turn them loose in a competition, almost a Darwinian competition with other strategies, and you see how they do, right? And there's famous work on this. And we got interested in, do people with high vagus nerve activation, who are more pro-social, are they going to fare better in this kind of competition? Earlier work we've done has shown if you have high vagus nerve activation at a baseline setting, and I'm waiting for Google or somebody to have the iPhone app where you put your finger on it and somehow you measure vagus nerve. I'm not sure we could do it, but if you have high vagal tone in a resting setting, right, and you're just sitting there and I measure it in our lab, 6 months later, you're kinder, more outgoing, more positive emotion, better physical health and the like, lots of pro-social profiles. So here's what we did. We took participants who had high vagal tone and low vagal tone. And the low vagal tone people tend to be more competitive and Machiavellian and a little bit more prone to hostility and the like. A different kind of strategy, certainly part of our evolutionary story. We had 50 of those people, half of them high vagal tone, half low. And they played a tournament with, we had 12 people, 6 high vagal, 6 low vagal, play in a tournament with 50 other people with a trust game, where our 50 participants saw videotape only 20 seconds long of the 6 high vagal people, the 6 low vagal people, and then they had to make a really simple decision. You've got limited resources. how much do you give to each of those other people on the assumption they'll give back to you, right? You got to make a classic evolutionary decision. Who do I trust? Half of them were the more pro-social high vagal people, half were the low vagal people. All they saw, this is what's remarkable, was the high or low vagal person on video just listening to someone else talk, right? This is not a lot of information. And they go, okay, what's my gut feeling? Is that guy trustworthy? And what you find is that what this graph tells us is if I have high vagal tone and other people look at me, they intuitively trust me. They make that Gladwellian snap judgment of I trust that guy or that woman, and they're more likely to give you resources if you have this high vagal tone profile. Pro-social physiological profile leads to a quick judgment of trust, and then that trust makes me give more resources to that individual. Pretty interesting. Just 20 seconds of behavior, and I can pick it up and say, this is who I should give resources to. And we know that's a wise decision because that kind of person is more likely to cooperate, more likely to act altruistically, and the like. It pays to be good. Let me round out, and then we'll open up for... These are ways of estimating the relationship between each of those variables, right? Does high vagal tone predict judgments of trust? That's a t-test. Yes, it does. And then does that trust predict more resources given? And then that final loop is the mediational link in this statistical pathway. Okay, finally, and I really appreciate your patience and attention. My lab, thanks to Serena Rodriguez, who's now a professor, she came out of Sapolsky's lab at Stanford, really knows genetics and so many interesting things going on here. Well, lo and behold, on the third chromosome, there is a oxytocin genetic polymorphism, right? And what we know is that oxytocin, this part of the third chromosome, helps build up oxytocin receptors in different parts of the brain, which help us connect and care and take care of others, right? We know if you have a particular polymorphism, the AA combination, you're more likely to be autistic and suffer from Asperger's condition or have that as part of your profile. And the GGs, this other combination, are more likely to be altruistic. And so Serena did some SNPs of the DNA of 200 Berkeley undergrads. And what we measured was a fascinating test developed by Simon Baron-Cohen, you may have heard of. He is the less famous relative of Sacha Baron-Cohen. He's a cousin. Simon Baron-Cohen used to be a hero in our field until his cousin became Sacha Baron-Cohen. But he developed this, what's called the minds in the eye task, which is you get 36 pictures of eyes. And then the eyes are configured according to different muscle movements, and you have to read what emotion is in the eyes, right? It is tough stuff. I'm not very good at it, even though I've trained to code faces. So that would be, incredulity or whatever. It's a classic measure of empathy, and if you have this oxytocin gene that's on the more pro-social profile, you make fewer mistakes on that task. And she's got this whole set of data on this, which is fascinating. Okay. So all I'll say is our science, here's some of Darwin's quote on how this instinct for care is part of our strongest evolved instincts. The Dalai Lama of Tibetan Buddhism argues that compassion is wired into the basic state of human nature. Paul Ekman gave a talk at our center, and we saw some video. He just published a book with the Dalai Lama, and he went up to him and he said, it's interesting, Your Holiness, Charles Darwin actually felt as well that sympathy was our strongest instinct, like you. And the Dalai Lama laughed and said, I guess that makes me a Darwinian, which is not a bad state of wisdom. And we've got a lot going on at our center that you guys should tap into if you're interested in this science. So I really want to hear much more what you guys have to say or what you're thinking about. Thank you so much. Questions? or comments
So
or?
the last thing you've got listed on this slide is an emotion training tool. Is that for autistic, Asperger's?
Oh my God.
Or anybody, or what's that aimed at?
And boy, would we in my lab, we have, Paul Ekman has a tool that teaches you how to read microexpressions, 7 emotions. In 1 hour of training, you can teach people to be better at detecting lies. You can train up Asperger's individuals to be a little bit better at reading emotion. 7 emotions. We have 20 emotions represented in the face, the best library of those faces in the world, and we have 15 emotions represented in the voice. And so we are just beta testing a system that teaches kids, teachers, adults, citizens, how to learn about this important language. And it's going to be awesome, and we'd love to talk to you about it.
So you alluded to this, I think, a little bit, but this innate kindness or compassion, it seems to be fragile in that when you scale it up, right? And in some sense, do you think the proper view is that we have institutions like religion and other social groups to help maintain this in the population? Or do you think that the in-group versus out-group kind of feelings that creates that actually is a net negative over what it could be?
Yeah. What a deep question. And I think you should be asking the question that I didn't really address here, which is, what's the role of institutions, right, in cultivating this? And here's how I think about it, which is that the human nervous system has all these genetically encoded capacities. I've given you one part. The in-group, out-group switch is the most potent competitor to compassion. We know if you look at a face that's from a different ethnic category than your own, these are liberal Princeton undergrads, the amygdala lights up. They go, oh, I don't trust that guy, even though they say that they do. And the task, I think a lot of people feel, and there's a lot of vibrant evolutionary scholarship on how cultural traditions and institutions take those capacities and just codify them. It's fascinating. For example, the capacity for revenge killings is a human universal. Jared Diamond wrote about it in The New Yorker. And you have to have a strong state in place to knock that system out. And what Steve Pinker is arguing is those institutions come out of the raw materials of this compassionate tendency, right? The idea of rights, the idea of harm. So that's a great question. It's one of the major critiques of my work, so.
So if some of the causes of being pro-social or not being pro-social are genetic, then would we expect to see lower and lower numbers of people who are not pro-social in the gene pool?
Well, I think, so how do we think about the distribution of these strategies, of the self-interested, aggressive, we should pull those apart, fear-based strategies versus compassion. And I think they're equally distributed. And we need all of them, as Aristotle argued. We need the full repertoire of emotion. But I do feel when you look at human primates that we have a wider array of pro-social tendencies than our primate relatives. And so that is one of the big shifts in our design. So that would lend support to the kind of argument that you're making.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
In the School of Personal Growth we have here at Google, there's the Empathy Boot Camp, which is,
nice.
I don't know if you've had a chance to meet with Meng yet.
No,
but let's see, Thomas Lewis is a Stanford psychiatrist. He was here yesterday giving giving a talk. He actually presented some neurophysiological data for that. Essentially, that as our what's the outer layer called?
Cortex, or
so as our cortex grew, we've sort of we've moved to larger and larger social groups at a rate that has paralleled the growth of the cortex.
Right.
Going from the lower mammals up to primates, which have a larger one, and then we're the only. The argument is that we're the only ultra social. Essentially, we're social at a level where we can't keep track of all of the people we're social with. You know, primates can keep track of 100 different individuals, and that's the size of their social group. But we're social at, you know, millions of people, and that, he blames that on the cortex.
Right, and your question is exactly where I think in 10 years we'll be able to provide a more definitive answer, which is in this genetic evolution, what did we get that really characterizes that development? Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of the idea that institutions like religion and so forth are basically just, maybe co-opting is a little too strong a word, but taking credit for or codifying things that are actually evolved into our nervous systems. There seem to be a number of books around about that.
Yeah.
I just finished reading one that I thought was particularly striking. It was Religion Explained by Pascal Boyer. Do you know that book?
I've heard of the title. I don't know it.
Yeah, it's, well, I recommend it to you.
Great.
It's a very chewy, complicated read. It's not a fast read at all. I had to read it twice before I felt like I really understood it. But
yeah.
It's really
terrific. And Robert Wright, The Evolution of God would be interesting if you guys are interested. And it's interesting, you know, Karen Armstrong said 2,500 years ago, as the great ethical traditions took hold, classical Greek thought, Hinduism, Buddhism, and the like, her thesis is all of those early institutions grasped onto our capacity for compassion and codified it. And I think and religion would be one variation of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so the question about the cortex 2 questions ago, and one of the ones about religion before that made me wonder if kind of a way of having the, you know, different groups we assign ourselves to is a way of allowing your cortex to decide who you're going to be more altruistic with and not, without having to individually know.
That's great.
Like each person.
Yeah. So what do you think about that? I think you're right.
I have one personal anecdote, which is, so we have like a lot of mailing lists here, like for sale and stuff like that. And I'm much more willing to buy used stuff and whatnot from another Googler because I expect a higher standard of reciprocity.
Yeah, you know, and it turns out, you know, in this cultural spread of altruism and compassion, which is part of the subtext of your questions, the reputation of a group, which is part of what you're talking about, hinges critically on will they reciprocate and do well for you. And so I think you're right.
Sorry, foot's asleep. Thank you for the talk. Not that I just had a crazy thought because I first heard of the vagus nerve from a poet who was talking to.
Who was that?
Sorry, I'm so horrible with names. That's one of the things I study here at Google is memory because mine's so bad. But I usually recall situations. So something's wrong up here.
That's more important.
But he was talking about how when he was talking with neurobiologists that they were just coming up with some research around vagus nerves and the linkage with the heart and also the construct of the vagus nerve being very similar to brain matter. More than
I'm sorry?
Brain matter, more than any other nerve, that the construct of the cells within the vagus nerve.
The myelination,
Yeah, so he was just romancing the notion that it gives some sort of background to the whole idea of the parables of us thinking with our heart or making decisions with our heart.
You know, it's so, if I should buy one or I should find one, but if I had a neuroscience colleague at Berkeley was giving a talk to a class and he had a primate's nervous system and you know, there's the spinal cord. Oh, there's a spinal cord. Whoa, what's that weird long thing that comes all the way, it goes all the way down to your gut, right? It's the vagus nerve. And it is the mind-body interface.
Yeah. So the question I have is a strange one, but like, have you looked at whether if there's a congenital defect or something wrong with the vagus nerve, whether intellectually you can still be compassionate or whether it's a fulfilling whole body thing?
Right. Yeah. What a great question. We in the world of emotion and morality are interested in the rational cortical parts and then the bodily parts, and ideally they're both operating, but they're going to be people with, you know, different kinds of information flow through the vagus nerve for genetic reasons or the like that represent a way to study that. And I think that'll be it's a very, very interesting way to get at the question of gut feeling and its role in judgment. think we're, one more question maybe? All right, well, thank you. I have books here if you do want to buy them for check. But thank you so much. It's great to talk to you.